good evening everybody and welcome to the Thursday, the October 17th, sorry we're sharing mics. All right, welcome to the October the 17th Camden Planning Board meeting. We had a site walk on Tuesday. Thank you, Jeannie. Is this changed? Is this different?
This has just got a few more details for you, just so you know.
All right, marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you.
And today's regular planning board meeting, and that's the first one, yeah. The first thing we need to do is just see if there are any public comments on non-agenda items.
Could you, I'm sorry.
Yes, go on.
Apologies, but could you go over what you said about the sidewalk? You held the sidewalk on Tuesday morning?
We held the site walk on Tuesday morning, some at 8 o'clock, and Ethan and Richard and Matt were in attendance. Sorry, yes. I think that was it. Was anybody else in attendance? Jeremy? Anybody else make it?
No.
Okay.
Everybody here.
And Will, who presented.
And just to clarify, I did speak with Bill Kelly, the town attorney, on this, and there were no issues surrounding you guys not attending. It was just a site walk to gain context into the project.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. That was our understanding.
If the applicant approves, then.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything else you need to know about that, Jeannie?
No, I just wanted to get it in the record.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. So, seeing no public comments on non-agenda items, let's move forward to the main item on the agenda tonight, which is the site plan review for a new non-residential building over 1,000 square feet. I think, should we start off by having Jeremy make some basic comments?
Sure. And I wrote a little memo. You don't have it, but I can give it to Jeannie to just put into the record. It states, in order to facilitate an efficient review of the proposed project, I reviewed the submittal documents submitted by Gartley and Dorsky on behalf of Camden Properties LLC and CL Camden LLC. Based on this review, I found that the application is complete and meets the space and bulk standards for developments on lots in the Harbor Business District. I've also reviewed Article 10 performance standards and find that the project conforms to the town's performance standards. In terms of site plan review, in Article 12, Section 6, approval criteria, the applicant has provided evidence in the submittal documents that indicate that the project will meet the approval criteria standards 1 through 9. Those standards 10 through 12 are not applicable in this instance, but those are what you guys are going to weigh your approval on, those approval standards. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, so thank you very much, Jeremy. I think if we turn it over to Will Gartley from Gartley and Dorsky, he is acting as owner's rep? Or as the agent for Camden Properties LLC and Lyman Morse at Wayfarer. Okay. Oh, yes, thank you.
And then, remember, we do have a public hearing on this, so we'll do this and then we'll go into a public hearing, correct?
That
We have
sounds-
2 tonight, public hearings? Or we have to wait? Just one?
Only one for the whole application.
All right.
Correct.
This one.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right, so if we're ready, do you want to?
Okay.
Do you want
All
to
right,
run
good evening.
through?
Thank you. Will Gartley with Gartley and Dorsky. I'm representing Camden Properties LLC and CL Camden LLC. They're joint owners of the property, and this property is a unit in a condominium that was approved quite a while ago. This building has been in existence for some time, and as everybody saw on the site walk, definitely could use some upgrading. They plan to tear the building down, and the existing footprint is 5,121 square feet, and they're going to replace it with a new building that's 4,788 square feet. The reduction in footprint is occurring. Hey, good evening, Cabot.
Hi, Mike.
The reduction in footprint is happening along the westerly side. The easterly side is basically going to stay pretty much where it is. The easterly side of the building there's a gap of about 1.5 feet, and then there's a timber crib retaining wall. That timber crib retaining wall is going to go away and be replaced with a combination foundation and retaining wall. So there'll be one wall there rather than two that's there now. The building is going to continue to be the same height as the peak at the northerly end of the building. That's going to be continued for the entire length of the building. We've included quite a submission list of material, and a lot of the things that we included were to address some comments from the pre-application meeting. On all of Greenspur's building elevations, there's a dashed line that shows the outline of the existing building so that you can see what that is compared to the proposed. We have the ridge elevations labeled everywhere. I also provided a sheet that showed you how we calculated the average original grade around the building. Although, like I said, in this case, that really is nothing but a line to measure the peak to. Really, that max elevation is what we have to stick with. I also provided, I think there was another question, the view corridors. Jeremy mentioned the view corridors. When you read that section of the ordinance, there's not a lot of guidance there on exactly how those are supposed to be measured and calculated. So as you can see on that plan, I just basically went along Atlantic Ave and looked at where you could view across this property to the harbor. And you can see there's a pretty sizable area that exists now and that's going to remain. If anything, it's probably going to get increased a little bit because of the reduction in the footprint.
And that view corridor does meet the standard.
Also check that. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Correct. We've got all our proposed grading on here. We have public utilities. There's overhead power from Atlantic Ave that's probably going to be maintained pretty much the way it is. There's public water and sewer that already services the building, so we're going to maintain those services. We are going to be regrading the parking lot to make access into the different parts of the building a little better and to improve drainage. We've got 2 catch basins shown along the easterly side towards the southerly end. Those are going to pick up stormwater that currently exists there now but isn't being handled very well. And those basins are all going to have a sump in the bottom of them to collect any sand and salt from winter salting before it gets discharged into the harbor, so those can be cleaned out. So that's an improvement that is being included as part of the project. Otherwise, there's a lot of data there. We've gone through the submission list and the performance standards and feel like we've got a complete submission and show that we meet all the performance standards.
Okay. So thank you very much. At this point, we need to open it up to public hearing. I usually have here's my cheat sheet about things to read. You know, we need to go through all these criteria right first.
Why don't we first find, you just, I would ask to make a motion that you find the application complete based on my memo or your review or whatever. I think basing on my memo is fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So can I make a motion that we find this application complete based on Jeremy Martin's memo?
I make that motion.
You want to make the motion? Okay.
Yes, that it's complete, it's delivered, and
I second it.
No second. All those in favour? Aye. That's unanimous, 5-0.
Rosie, I did hand out just a couple additional perspective views that at the last meeting, Ethan had mentioned wanting to understand what it was going to look like kind of from in front of the building in the harbor. And so hopefully those add a little more understanding to what that'll look like if you're in a boat in the harbor about 70 feet in front of the building.
I think if you look at that combined with the other photo that they showed in the application, correct, probably gives it a little more perspective.
Okay. So I haven't got my cheat sheet with me, but it's disappeared.
The public hearing It's underneath
They might have mine. Oh, look at that.
It's not.
it's not.
It's not.
Jeff
I have
gonna be
public
winging
hearing
it.
procedure right here.
Public hearing.
You got it?
Yeah, I
Somebody
it
got the
right here.
public hearing sheet?
It's dated 2006, but it should still
no,
work.
well, that's.
Oh, here's one's dated 2013.
Did you steal this? Is that the one that
Hey,
you
these
still
are around.
Okay. So generally, we read through the... Can I use this? Is 2013 close?
You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
And as a general rule, I read through this just so everybody knows
Sure.
what we're doing. So the applicant or their representatives make a presentation of the facts of the application to the public. The chair then calls on any members of the public who wish to comment on the application. The public will restrict the length of their comments to no more than 3 minutes each. All speakers must state their name, residence and any connection to the application to establish standing. We ask generally that you come up to the front, or we can pass a mic back to over here. Wonderful, and we'll make sure the mic's turned on. All speakers need to print their name on the attendance form so we have accurate records, and all questions and comments shall be addressed to the board, and any requests for replies shall be made through the chair. There'll be 2 parts to the public hearing. Only 1 opportunity to speak will be allowed per speaker during each part of the public hearing. Comments must be relevant to the approval criteria for the application. The chair will exclude any irrelevant or unduly repetitious comments. After comments from the public, the first part of the hearing will be closed so that the board can discuss the application with the applicant. No public comment will be allowed at this time. The second part of the public hearing will then be open for final remarks from the interested members of the public with the same rules of order as in the first part. The second part of the public hearing will then be closed and the board will have its final discussions with the applicant. The board will then proceed with its deliberations or continue the application to a future date. No public hearing and no deliberation will continue past 8 p.m. at the discretion of the board. Oh, I like that. That wasn't in the most recent one. Can we make that 7?
Who
Okay.
deleted, did they delete that?
I don't know. I haven't seen that before. That's good. Okay, so before we, because we're assuming that this is complete and accepting your recommendation at this point, then we can open this up for any public comment.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So, having said that, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to this or comment? Okay.
No one.
Okay. All right. So, in that case, we can close the first part of the public hearing. All right.
You then go to comments or questions from the board.
Right. So, all right, gentlemen. Do you guys have any comments, questions?
No, I'm stuck down with Ethan.
What's that? No, I'm not ready to jump in, thanks.
These are just comments.
Well, this is where we're deliberating to see if you've got any issues, bring it up now.
The, on the zoning board of appeals time, they discussed plantings. And it was basically, considered it would be part of our review, but then it was just taken that, whatever you guys wanted to do sounded probably like a good idea. So I was just wondering if you could speak to the difference in the footprint and then what might be planted there.
Sure. So one of the things we did look at when we were on the site walk was what there was currently for landscaping around the property. And I'll just quickly, on the northeast side, abutting the Fisher property, there's a really nice landscape bed and a retaining wall there and trees, so we definitely don't want to touch that area. The area along Atlantic that has a planter labeled is kind of an overgrown, there used to be a stairway there, actually, a long time ago. And now it's a timber crib wall that has a lot of things in it that are kind of overgrown. Our thought is that we're going to, in the future, look at potentially redoing that and maybe reopening an access point from Atlantic Ave down into here. That's going to take some coordination with the Select Board because it's Atlantic Ave, there's a right-of-way there, there's a fence there that we'd need to put an opening in, and so there's some additional work there. But there's not a lot of space along that side. Down on the westerly side, between Atlantic Ave, the harbor, and the building, is really just a grass area, and it's probably going to be just maintained as a grassed area. The highest, I mean, a lot of it is below the flood elevation, and a lot of it does see some extreme tides in that area. It's not, mostly it's not salt tolerant. There is, when we were standing there, you could see a line where the salt tolerant vegetation changed. It's probably somewhere between elevation 8 and 8.5. Above that, where the LP tanks are, is really just a grassed area that they maintain. Otherwise, there's not much more space on the property.
I'd seen a planting plan in these documents. I believe it was on one of the architect's drawings. I've been looking, I can't. I noted some of the varieties, like they were like maybe a little southern, since they're from Virginia. A nice plan.
I do not recall
I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah.
one or discussing a landscape plan.
Yeah, I just remember it being grass and keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Are you sure it wasn't wishful thinking?
Maybe I can just,
Just under candlelight today.
You were on the half of town that lost power.
can jump in, and I think maybe where Jeff was going, because the footprint is shrinking a little bit.
Yeah.
It is.
So in that area, I think that was probably more your question?
Yeah, it was just a clarification.
That area where the building's shrinking?
Yeah, that, I mean, that area is just going to be maintained as grass,
Okay.
similar to what's on that side of the building. So if I wasn't clear, I'm sorry.
All right.
Because it's subject to a
It's
fair
still
amount of weather. And
Right.
There would also be some planters on the east side, you know, where the doorways are and so forth, just to spruce it up.
So this planter that's labelled on the north edge, I mean, so potentially at some point there may be a stairway, which sounds wonderful, but until that point, it's a scruffy timber crib wall right now.
Right.
Is there something at least can be done to make it slightly less scruffy? I mean, or could you grow a vine up it, or, I mean, in terms, I know there's not a huge amount of space for planting, but
I mean, it's overgrown
Yeah.
right now.
You can't even
I
see
mean,
it.
I don't know I don't know how you'd plant anything there. I'm just throwing that out there.
just,
But,
you're just going to
Yeah,
trim
you-
it?
you could take everything out and start
Right.
over, I suppose.
right.
I don't know, I mean, it's,
We had chatted about what kind of process would happen when and if they wanted to put the stairs back in there. And likely the stairs would actually come down off the sidewalk and head east.
Right.
You're just working against the grades, and it's a much more costly, bigger stairwell if you're going west.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and if you look at photo 8 and the pictures that I submitted, picture 8. That's in front of the red car and the white truck. That's the timber planter, and you can see that I couldn't even tell you what's in it. This is a lot of stuff growing in there, and it's all kind of hanging down over. On that portion, you can't even see, whatever those vines are completely covering that timber crib wall. That wall's 4 or 5 feet tall.
Right.
My question on that, would we be able to handle that as a minor amendment? Or
Yes, so if we do and meanwhile, I've got a plan for minor revisions and changes that I'm going to bring to the select board, and then you guys ultimately, but something like that, we could probably it's as simple as a stair set coming off, we could handle as a minor field adjustment or a minor amendment.
I won't want them to have to come back for that.
Wouldn't make them come through a public hearing process and all this for stairs.
It needs to be cleaned up one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
And no work is proposed in that area as part of this project, correct, Will?
Right.
Look, is that a copper plate? Yes, he's found a plant list.
Oh, that's under that's the erosion control notes?
Erosion control notes,
Yeah.
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 So are they getting applied, or is this just like a
No, I mean, those are,
boilerplate standard?
like, if you have those situations, these are things you can use. They're not necessarily something that we're proposing. So they're just a standard set of notes that, more of plantings that are good for temporary erosion control, like during construction for larger projects. We're not going to have a big area of exposed soil that's going to need to be stabilized, so.
Okay.
You really read
So-
this stuff, huh?
He's retired.
Designed a new master bedroom suite for a project I'm doing in Vinyl Haven.
There you go.
Candlelight.
Nice. Old school.
Old house, an old,
Not to scale.
It puts you in the right frame of mind, right?
but I couldn't send it to anybody because I had,
I'm good.
All right.
So I think there's some question about whether number 10 applies, the special provisions for piers and wharfs. Is there, the section reads, special criteria for piers, wharves, breakwaters, municipal boat ramps, municipal piers, consolidated piers, causeways, marinas, bridges over 20 feet in length, and other uses projecting into water bodies requiring site plan approval. I'm just curious about whether that applies, and secondly, maybe you could speak to the methodology for replacing the pilings, how you watch for the erosion and everything, and from the site plan, that was one thing, it was a low tide when we were there, which was fortunate, but you're gonna be down in the dregs there for a bit, right? Which is sort of the surface of the harbor at low tide or
Yep,
something. So-
and something I should have mentioned in our presentation was that we do need a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Protection. And then when those permits get submitted, copies also go to Department of Marine Resources, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and the National Fisheries and Wildlife. So it's going to get looked at pretty hard by them. But process-wise, we'll be removing the building first, and taking those piles, actually, I'm not even sure I'd call them piles. They're not driven into the soil or to the bottom. They're actually sitting on rocks or little concrete
Little
pads.
pads, I saw
or-
that, yeah.
It's a pretty, yeah,
That's why the building.
that's why that end of the building is lower, yeah. So taking those out and cleaning it up will actually be easier than if they were driven, because then if they're driven, you've really got to get a crane out over to try to lift them and pull them out. And then in replacing the building, everything that's up above high water, we're planning to do, in fact, I've even kind of shown the schematic within the site plan. At the north end of the building, you can see a solid double line. That's where we're going to have a full foundation wall. And then all the way along the east side, replacing that timber crib wall, there's a double line there. So that's showing you where we're going to have a cast-in-place concrete wall. And clearly, the portion of that that's the southerlymost end is going to have to happen between tides. And so that work will, the existing wall will be removed, the footing will be formed. You wait for the tide to come and go, place the concrete, you wait for the tide to come and go, form the walls, and then do the same thing over again. So it is a little bit of a slow process for the portion of cast-in-place concrete work that we have to do that is below the high tide line. The driving of piles, there is a timing consideration of when that can happen, if it happens when it's in the water, but most of this is above low water, so it's in the intertidal between high and low, so it makes it a lot easier for us to do the construction. So at low water, we can, again, I think we're going to be able to drive these piles from land. We're going to have a crane that'll just sit in the parking lot and reach over and drive the piles. We're still working with Greenspur and our structural team to figure out exactly what those piles are going to be and how they're going to get driven, but most likely we're going to try to do that from land.
You had mentioned that you reduced the number of piles to 3 versus 4.
Yeah, there's a good chance that we're going to be at a spacing of 3 instead of 4, yeah. Either way, we're going to have less total impact than what's under there now, because there's just a lot of, every time there was a sag, another post got put under there. Yeah. And so, and part of that, a copy of those applications will come to the town, and there'll be a copy here on record. But they will also include a much more detailed plan of what I just explained, how the work's going to happen between tides, how everything's going to get cleaned up, that there's not going to be any debris left, and how they're going to get driven.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify for, I think for Ethan and his point, for 10B, right, one of the standards talks about that there shall be, shall show no significant adverse impact on marine life. I mean, that would be your experience in dealing with Army Corps and DEP when it comes to these projects. Am I correct to say that they find that when they issue your permit, correct?
That is a finding. So before the DEP or the Corps actually issues the permit, they send a copy to those agencies, Department of Marine Resources, and ask for comment back. If they have comment or questions, then we get a copy of it and are asked to respond to whatever they want. Sometimes they can ask for additional studies. Sometimes we just did a marina in Belfast where we had to hire a diver because they wanted more information. Luckily here, that was totally new impact. Here, we're reducing the impact, so I'm expecting we're going to have a pretty easy go of getting through those processes.
But generally, they won't issue a permit if they find that there is a significant impact.
No.
Correct.
No. And if they did find something, they won't issue a permit without some sort of mitigation or
Right.
compensation.
And that was my point, just to get to your
Yeah,
point.
I gather what
where
you're
it's-
saying, yeah.
where
I
it
see
says
where
in
you're
there.
going with that.
And just to clarify too, that we will not issue a permit for anything until all their permits are in place from the Army Corps and the DEP.
Does the board feel that section 10 does apply to this building with the pilings going into the water, out into the water?
Yeah, just because of that.
Yeah.
What makes the Army Corps of Engineers be involved in this as opposed to just the DEP?
They have oversight over the waters of the U.S., and so that even includes wetlands. So navigable, it's a long story, but this clearly does. Anything below high tide is navigable water, so they get involved.
Just because you're actually
Yep.
going into the water,
Right.
therefore.
And they're actually a little more stringent about impacts below high water than the DEP is. They're a little more, their rules are a little tougher to meet their qualifications. Again, we're reducing total impact here, so I don't expect to have an issue at all.
Right, and I get what you're saying by reducing total impact, but a different view would be that you're disturbing what's already there and then replacing it, and so that's actually more impact in the short term.
Oh, during the
During
construction?
the construction, right.
Right,
And I
right.
think we're worried more about the construction impact, or at least I am, I shouldn't speak for everybody, than I am about long-term impact.
I see what you're saying, yep.
Because once the pilings are in place, they're in place, and everything's gonna come
Right.
back around it. The building next door that's getting all that work done right there, the harbor, has that, you can see that, what do they call it, that tube to hold the soil.
Right,
I
right.
don't know how effective those are, right? I mean, it's kind of laying there, and probably looks really good the first day they lay it, and then after a few weeks of working on the site, it's sort of, crumpled and, in different places and not necessarily,
Right.
Well,
Well, that boom that they're using actually has a curtain that goes
Yeah.
all the way to the
Down,
bottom.
okay.
And the idea is that any silt that gets in there, I mean, a big difference between that project and this one is they've put a lot of fill material to create almost a little access road down around the side of the building and to the harbor side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of that fill was put in below high water.
Right, and so it's gonna naturally wanna.
And so we're not putting any fill in.
Yeah.
I mean, the existing ground and the grass and everything is going to still be the way it is. We're not filling anything. We're not putting any permanent fill under there. And it's not like there's a lot of habitat there. I mean, if you
Right.
crawl under there, there's some debris and some rocks.
There's no mussel farm under there?
No,
Green grabs.
yeah.
Well, just.
So I mean, that's in our favor too, that there's not a lot of habitat. I mean, if there was eelgrass or something like that, then we'd have even a bigger issue.
Yeah.
But there just really isn't anything there that's going to be of a big concern to everybody.
Just so you know, during construction, I'll be out there and Steve Wilson will be out there making sure erosion control and all that is functioning and in place throughout the project.
Yeah, I think it's important that the board be aware of 10 probably applying.
I agree. I
And,
think you're
and
right.
that we do have the right, if we choose, to ask for an environmental, sort of a biological impact, but I'm not saying we should. I didn't see in my walk a lot of habitat that I'd be too
Right.
concerned about, but I would be concerned about the erosion factor. And, I trust Steve and Jeremy to make sure that those things are handled properly.
Yeah, we're on that stuff quite a bit these days.
But I think it's important that we at least acknowledge those issues.
And that was my point about the Army Corps and DEP's permit. When they do significant adverse impact, they generally don't issue a permit when they find that, so.
And we don't have anything at this point in time in climate change or anything as far as affecting what people can build right by the water, as far as level, sea level rise or anything like that.
No, I mean, you will look at the finished floor elevation on this as 1 foot above base flood elevation.
Yeah.
I mean, at
Commercial at ground level, commercial at ground level.
commercial, right.
So that changes.
One thing I will say, as far as that, I am going to be looking at the community rating system for flood insurance and looking at possible ways in the future that we may want to bring that base flood 1 foot, maybe go to 2 feet above base flood elevation. This is a bigger question that the town will have to get into, but it could drastically reduce people's flood insurance rates and make the town more resilient to flooding.
For new projects.
For new projects, correct. Or substantial improvements as defined in the flood ordinance.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Are we
It's a
still
very
looking?
thorough package. Really appreciate it. It's very.
Yeah, I do appreciate all the effort that went in, particularly these,
Yeah, I like the renderings.
renderings are really helpful to me. I will say again to the board, just to consider, this is a pretty dramatic change to the structure that's in place right now, as far as what you see. It's more modern, contemporary looking. It's got these angular jut-out window areas and stuff. I think it's a subjective question as to whether you feel that it fits within the character of that area of the harbor. And that's within our purview under item 3, the relationship of the proposed building to the environment and neighboring buildings. Would this building be more suitable, depending on what people's views are? Again, it's very subjective. If it didn't have those window jut-out features. Some people may think they're great. Some people may think that they're ugly. Some people may think that they're just there, so.
And in response to that, I think when you get into the details of number 3, it asks if the physical placement of the proposed buildings on structures on site shall fit harmoniously with the terrain of the site and with the neighbouring buildings or structures. And it's about bulk, location and height. It's not about aesthetics.
Yeah, we don't have much.
And as much as I would love to give you my aesthetic opinion about what I think of this building and how it may or may not fit in the community, I don't think it's about that, and I can't see in terms of the bulk and the massing how that's a radical change. And I wish I could legislate beauty and we could agree on that, but nobody's managed to, and I think we get into dangerous.
No, and I appreciate
Territory
that, I do,
saying that,
but there
I
is
see what you're
for
saying.
sure the fact that the front end of this building, the part that we're looking at here, is going up 5-6 feet, somewhere around that neighborhood. This point right here, on the part facing the harbor is actually going to be raised by 5 or 6 feet. Now, that may be, per the code and how you're supposed to calculate everything, but again, we're gonna see a building that looks dramatically taller in that space. And again, with these dramatic features on it, you can say that those are aesthetics, or you could say that they're part of the character of the building in relationship to the proposed building. I personally think it looks nice. I'm not sure it looks the way I would have done it if I, again, these are personal subjective statements that I'm making. I don't think it looks bad, but it does look dramatically different. And I think that when drawings are one thing, and then when you actually, or someone who uses the harbor or whatever, and you're used to a certain view from the waterfront or something like that, you will see something that looks dramatically different than what is there now. And I think it's important that the board at least acknowledge that in our own personal decision to either support it or oppose the project.
I agree, and not getting into the subjective role either, especially as an architect. I just say that I admire what the applicants have done of hiring a very capable professional architect for coming up with something. spent quite a bit of time going to Greenspur's website and see the work that they've done. Again, not being subjective, but I would argue that a lot of care has gone into this design, a lot of consideration. And that helps to make people a little more comfortable, I think. Did I overstep?
You're free to speak your mind, that's why we're here.
I think Greenspur was doing exactly that. They're trying to create a somewhat interesting building, but we got them to pull it back a little bit so that when you're walking along Atlantic Avenue, you're really going to hardly see those, except when you're out to the south of it. That was the idea behind it. Also, it brings out that light into the
Right,
back
right.
of the
Yeah,
building.
the idea of it is perfectly clear, the reasoning for it.
One thing for sure, it's going to present an interesting proposal with the American Boathouse, having one aesthetic and right next door, this one.
And that's sort of my point. I mean, again, we can go, I don't want to argue semantics on the number 3, and I think Rosie's generally right. We're not arguing aesthetics. We're not supposed to be considering the aesthetic per se. But when you're talking about the character of the neighborhood and the buildings and the relationship between the two, I think there is sort of an aesthetic component to that that can be in the eye of the beholder. It's not a one way or the other.
Agreed.
Maybe to just touch on, for Ethan, we do look at exterior facades in certain zones, not in this one, and we talked about that at the pre-app meeting, but we may want to have that conversation, as we move forward, this year to decide whether or not, and I wasn't here when we did that whole design review piece on certain zones on the facade, but maybe there may be an interest to review that going forward, and we can try to, not for this, but we can at least look at that if you'd like to. We can at least have that conversation in the future. Because it does look at things like more aesthetics that you're talking about.
Right, and, I think, there's definitely, again, it's just, for me, it comes down to, our job is to represent the people of the community, not just our own personal views, right? And so, most people aren't coming to these meetings or watching them online, believe it or not. But I could see people saying, once it goes up, say, wow, how did that get approved? Just because it is so significantly different. That's just a concern that I want the board to consider, that's all.
You, Nat? You got any response or thoughts or
Not on that one?
comments? I mean, I think when I think about how Camden Harbour has developed over the last 100 and 150 years, change is the one constant. And it's, developed from this kind of modest working harbour into a harbour that's kind of lined with residences that are million-plus residences, and it's full of, big yachts. So I think change happens all the time, and the harbour's a living being, including the buildings around it. And I think it is, good to be cognizant and have these conversations, but it's not something that's preserved in aspic. And, you could argue that a modern fiberglass yacht is not nearly as beautiful as an old wooden boat.
Yeah, leave the schooners and get the yachts out.
Aesthetics,
right?
but I mean, this is the nature of things move and change, and, they seem to, as far as I can see, have met all the criteria which we've asked them to meet. And while I share your desire that, we have the most beautiful place to live in that we possibly can, I don't feel like it's my job to comment on the aesthetics, unless I'm absolutely choking, and then I can't help myself, and I'm certainly not at that point.
Like the middle school.
So,
I personally think it's going to be a good addition to the harbor. The existing building, I've been to this area so many times growing up here and recently. The existing building is just such a deteriorated state. It'd be nice to keep it, but it's just kind of like falling into the harbor. And I'm just happy you're keeping it red, personally. It's like, I think it's going to look nice. I hear you with the roof line, but they have met our standards.
Right.
And the view corridor holds. So to me, I support it.
Another thing, I think is I admire how that side of the harbor is a working harbor, thanks to Lyman Morse Wayfarer. And this building won't trick anybody in thinking that, oh, this is a residential. It has a sort of an industrial look to it. So in that way, it fits in my mind, to that aesthetic of that side of the harbor.
Will, you had mentioned when we were walking the surface materials, that these were, I thought that might be interesting for Ethan, because I don't think he was in on that conversation.
Yep, I mean, the plan is for this to be a Kynar finished metal panel, and they're still trying to decide what the profile is going to be. I mean, it is going to have some texture, I think, to it. And I didn't submit a specific one because I think that's still up for discussion, but it is going to be a pre-finished metal panel. And the siding that's on there now is a metal panel. It's going to be a lot nicer than that, but it will have some texture to it.
Some buildings in Portland that have these panels, and they look pretty good. You can do it any color you want. So.
And during the walk, we had also discussed options for solar that might be incorporated in terms of the roof profile and the look of the building.
Yeah, on the east side, we'd have to tilt them up, but we are seriously considering a major solar panel roof. So I'm kind of waiting for the solar shingles to come out. And they're talking about re-upping that this coming year, so it'd be kind of fun to see if that could work too, which would look better.
I think in some ways, actually, these actually do you guys a disservice in some ways, because they're showing the high side of it, and actually what we're going to see most of the time, people walking along from the library are going to see this, except they're not going to see most of that. You're going to be looking down on it. So I actually think the view is going to be we're going to be looking down mostly on that building, and we're going to really see just part of the top story as we walk along that building.
If you're on Atlantic Ave, yeah.
If you're on Atlantic Ave, and if not, well, you're in a boat or you're looking across from the other side of the harbour.
Yeah.
Right, I mean,
From that comment, if you looked at like our picture number 3, which is standing on Atlantic Avenue, looking at that existing building, it'll be, actually, you'll see less building there. In fact, I actually spoke with
right.
the neighbor, Bob Hefner, who just bought that property across the street, and he was quite happy to see that chimney that's there is going to go away. So it's interesting talking, what different people's perspectives are. He's looked at the entire submission and was quite satisfied with it, and just told me that, please don't put the chimney back there. This one right here.
Yeah, well, I agree.
When did you speak with him, Will? Do you remember?
This afternoon.
Oh, and just so you know, I spoke with him as well. He called me a week or so ago, and he had the whole application. And he must have had someone local provided it to him, and I don't know who it was. No, and I ended up speaking. I spoke with him for like 45 minutes. Went through the whole packet with him, and then again, like Will said, his concern appeared to be the chimney. He mentioned that to me too.
Yeah.
But once he started looking at the Greenspur plans and where you saw that the building was going to go, shrink this way but go up this way a little bit, he lives right across the street on Atlantic Avenue. He's the one looking down at it. And after chatting with me about it, reviewing the plans, he didn't have any issues with it. He seems to be the one that will be most impacted.
You told me that several neighbors or other people in the community asked about, they said they wanted a red building.
Oh, that was at the zoning board meeting. There were a couple members of the zoning board, and I think Allison McKellar, who's a select board member, all mentioned that they wanted it to stay red.
I was just going to suggest, I don't know who you'd show to or have to show to, but it might be wise to get a couple color chips from Greenspur for what kind of red they're using.
Well, I think that is the plan, is that they're going to pick a profile and on a color and send them up to Cabot to take a look at. And so there is a plan to try to figure out what, they're going to send up some samples.
What I was worried about is having too bland a metal surface, you got to break it up somehow. So that's what I'm waiting for them to show me. They could do
Broken
that.
up pretty well with fenestration,
Yeah.
but no, I guess architecturally
Yeah.
we need to go on with something.
I'm sure you'll make a good decision about it, Kevin. Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions from the board?
I have a question. I think it's appropriate, but who might be the contractor of this project? You decide?
We're waiting to get the permitting process, and as you know, I've got a lot of friends in the construction businesses, and I'm saying that I'm doing this for now.
Okay.
But yeah, we have some great contractors around, so.
I only brought it up because I know that in the not too distant past, there was a project where some of the construction might have made us, think twice, and we later asked, like, oh, if only we'd ask about that, so.
Nevertheless, yes,
Right.
so fair enough that you don't, no, we don't need to know at this point.
We've got some pretty good backup on our own right, too, to make sure it all happens correctly, and, we got a whole staff of 3D modeling people, and, all that's gonna be done, so.
All right.
Yeah, we're lucky, though. We've got some good choices here now. 20 years ago, we didn't, but now,
Very good.
great contractors, yeah. And it will be mostly local. I really, big believer in local. I'm not bringing anybody in from outside.
Hey, we've got the best in the world here. Why do you need to bring anybody else in, right? Okay. Any more other questions or comments from the board?
Did you want to say something
No,
else?
no,
Okay.
good, sorry.
Okay, in which case, can we close the first part of the hearing at this point? Do we have, well, because there's no more remarks. Well, are there any more remarks from the public at this point, having heard what's been presented? No, okay, marvellous. So we can close the second part of the, do we need any more discussing? Okay. Do we have enough to, what are we making, the ideal would be that we make a finding that it's complete and we accept the decision, is
We
that?
did that already.
We did that.
Okay, so what are we finding, that it's,
Now you're going through the approval criteria, sections 1 through, let's say, 10 now.
okay,
And you would have to, again, remember what I don't know if you all have that in front of you, but I think I see Ethan does, Jeff does, but
site plan approval criteria.
the site plan shall be approved unless in the judgment of the planning board, the applicant is not able to reasonably meet one or more of these standards. So you're reviewing, again, 1 through 11, and saying that you meet the standard to preserve. So for instance, number 1 is preserve and enhance the landscape. Okay,
Okay.
so I will let you take it away
But
from
do I
there.
need to read all of these out?
Yes.
For
One,
everybody?
yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, do they meet number 1, the landscape, to preserve and enhance the landscape shall be preserved in its natural state insofar as practical by minimising tree removal, disturbance of soil and by retaining existing vegetation during construction. After construction is completed, landscaping shall be designed and planted to define, soften or screen the appearance of off-street parking areas from the public right-of-way and abutting properties and or structures, and to minimise the encroachment of the proposed use on neighbouring land uses. That's a long sentence. Okay, so is there any landscaping either existing or proposed involved with this proposal? And do we feel like these criteria have been met, gentlemen?
I think we've heard testimony that there's minimal landscaping and disruption, and that any landscaping that's going to be there is going to meet the criteria.
Okay.
So I would move that we find that number 1 satisfied.
Complete. Do we need to second and approve each one?
I'll
Do we have a
second that.
Okay, all those in favour? Say aye, so that's 5-0 in favour for number 1. Number 2, erosion control. A, preservation and protection of natural vegetation where possible. B, keeping duration of exposure of disturbed soils to as short a period as possible and stabilising the disturbed soils as quickly as practicable. C, use of temporary vegetation or mulching to protect exposed critical areas during development. D, use of debris basins, sediment basins, silt traps or other acceptable methods to trap the sediment from stormwater runoff. E, no storage of fill materials within 50 feet of the banks of any stream, intermittent or perennial or water body. F, no removal of topsoil from any lot except for that removed from areas to be occupied by buildings, paving or other surfaces that will not be revegetated. So is there any soil disturbance associated with this project and/or a possibility of erosion occurring as a result?
Sure, there is.
Obviously, clearly there is, yes. Do we feel like all of these issues have been sufficiently addressed in the application?
Yeah, I move that the applicant has satisfied the erosion control by following main DEP best management practices and Army Corps standards in their permitting processes.
Okay,
And also, as per Jeremy, will be under the supervision of both Steve and Jeremy throughout the process.
That Army Corps worry about.
And as detailed in one of the drawings here about
as detailed in the
erosion control
application.
during construction.
Okay, I'd second that. Can we have a,
Second,
okay.
A
And
motion?
all those in favour?
Absolutely.
Aye, that's 5-0 in favour. 3, relationship of the proposed building to environment and neighbouring buildings. The physical placement of proposed buildings or structures on the site shall fit harmoniously with the terrain of the site and with neighbouring buildings or structures, taking into account the bulk, location and height of the buildings or structures and such natural features as slope, soil type and drainage ways. The proposed buildings or structures shall not interfere unreasonably with the solar access of existing buildings or adjacent parcels. Is there a building being constructed as this project, and if so, will the results be compatible with the surrounding buildings? Do we?
well, we've certainly spoken about it
We have,
earlier
yeah.
tonight, and if you want to summarize anything, Ethan, would you care to summarize what we said?
Yeah, you can make the motion, Ethan.
Um,
We're doing that.
probably not.
Second,
You want me to make a motion?
Sure.
I move that the proposed building is reducing its existing footprint compared to the existing building and in the same location and orientation. So as such, it satisfies this criteria.
I'd second that. All those in favour? Aye? Aye, 5-0.
I missed the
Favour?
second, I'm sorry.
That was Rosie.
Rosie.
I second that. Okay, number 4, vehicular access, parking and circulation. The proposed site layout shall provide for safe access to and egress from public and private roads. A, any exit driveway shall be so designed as to provide the following minimum site distance measured in each direction, as measured from the point at which the driveway meets the public or private right-of-way. B, the street serving the site shall be adequate to carry the anticipated traffic, and the site plan shall locate points of access to avoid hazardous conflicts with existing turning movements and traffic flows. C, pedestrian ways shall be safely separated from vehicular traffic. Are there any changes to the existing road layout?
no, there aren't.
Not
Curb
really.
cut stays the same.
No.
Just
And
added
it's-
parking.
It's,
Okay.
parking is, redundant.
He probably addressed it in his.
I would like to add, I did, and I failed to mention it, I'm sorry, but we did get written okays from all of the departments, Public Works, Public Safety, Police and Fire, and Wastewater. So I just wanted to share that with you, that Public Works has no issues from their perspective. They're not changing anything out by public street system, so they have no issues. So I just felt like mentioning that right now while you were.
And there is an on-site change that was described in the site walk, where they're raising the area where the parking is going to go, but it looked like it was going to fit right into the slope of the land and provide ample parking. So I would move that the applicant is satisfied the criteria to the extent that they are changing any parking, that it's going to be suitable for the site.
Okay. All those in favour? So aye, that's 5-0 in favour, unanimous. Number 5, surface water drainage. Adequate provision shall be made for surface drainage so that removal of storm waters will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on neighbouring properties, downstream water quality, soil erosion or the public storm drain system. Wherever possible, on-site absorption of runoff waters shall be used to minimise discharges from the site. drainage facilities shall be designed for a 25-year storm frequency. Will there be any changes made to the site that change the existing stormwater flow?
Actually, their design reduces it.
Yeah, there are changes that will, change the existing stormwater flow, but I move that applicant has actually demonstrated an improvement to how the handling of the surface water drainage will be handled, especially on that one side of the building where there's a gap between the building and the
Is it
foundation.
the one side where the foundation is also going to serve as?
Yeah, it's going to become part of the retaining wall, so I think
Side,
that's,
B
it's
side
going
building.
to,
In terms of Jeannie writing a motion that's like manageable.
well, I had it going, I had it.
You were good. Can we just shorten it?
They've actually demonstrated they will improve the surface water drainage on the site, and I move that we find that criteria satisfied.
And I would second that.
Right, all those in favour? Aye, 5-0. Thank you. All right, number 6, public, no, we just did public 6.
No, we did 5, you're on 6.
Okay. Public utilities. The development shall not impose an unreasonable burden on sewers and storm drains, water lines or other public utilities. New utilities shall be sized and existing utilities upgraded to adequately handle the demands of the development. Will there be additional facilities using sewer, water or other utilities, and will additional water be discharged into the storm drain system?
So the applicant has coordinated with Maine Water and the town sewer sanitary department. So I move that the applicant has proved that there is no undue adverse effects to the public utilities.
Yep, I would second that.
That's it.
Okay, all those in favour? 5-0 in favour. Number 7, special features of development. Exposed storage areas, exposed machinery installation, service areas, truck loading areas, utility buildings and similar structures shall have setbacks and screening to provide a buffer to sight and sound sufficient to minimise their adverse impact on other land uses within the development area and on surrounding properties. Are there any new exposed storage areas, exposed machinery installations, service areas, etc. associated with this project?
Might be non-applicable.
So that's a NA, is that? Do we,
Is there?
It's just the additional garage, but that's not exposed.
Yeah.
so we make a motion that this criteria is not applicable to this project? How would we?
And say why, because there are no,
Exterior exposed storage areas, exposed machinery installation, service areas, truck loading areas, utility buildings, and similar structures.
There.
Could you
Jeff
read that
said it.
again?
There we go.
Do you want to start at the beginning and say the whole thing?
That was it.
She's got to
We need a
attribute it
second.
to someone.
You got it.
All right.
You got a second?
Does somebody want to second that? Okay, all those in favour? Aye, 5-0.
Moving on.
All right, number 8, exterior lighting. All exterior lighting shall be designed and shielded to avoid undue adverse impact on neighbouring properties and rights of way. So will there be any additional exterior lighting, and does the lighting design comply with the zoning ordinance?
Yes.
I move that the applicant has provided a cut
Exactly.
sheet
The
that
sconce.
has a dark sky compliant light fixture.
Yeah, and I compliment that it's a full cutoff fixture and that you're using a warm color temperature for the light.
Yes, the warm color.
There it is.
All right. Does somebody want to second that?
Absolutely.
All right, all those in
Mr. Second,
favour?
Aye.
5-0. Did you get that, Jeannie?
no.
Warm color, dark sky compliant
fixture. Let's have a, did you start it? I think you started this.
Make the motion.
You make the motion.
Make the motion. That's
Make
not what I just did.
motion. Yeah, you did. You didn't?
I was just complimenting the fixture.
Yeah, it was perfect.
I don't know how to do motions. I move that, oh boy, the exterior lighting for this project be supported and approved based on the fact of its reduced impact and its qualities of light cutoff and warm color temperature.
And second that.
You second? Good.
All right. So all those in
Thank you, Richard.
favour? Say aye. Good job, Richard. Got to do it at least once.
Yeah,
The more you do it, the easier it gets.
yeah.
All right. Number 9, emergency vehicle access. Provisions shall be made for convenient and safe emergency vehicle access to all buildings and structures at all times of year, including 20-foot wide fire lanes at locations as may be recommended by the fire department. Will the access for emergency vehicles to this area change? I'm thinking, no.
I move that there's no proposed changes to the emergency vehicle access.
You can also mention that the fire department is okay with the proposal,
Everybody's signed off on it.
and police.
And police.
I would second that there have been no changes and it's been approved by the police and the fire department.
All right.
Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Okay, number 10, special criteria for piers and wharves. We're going to read the whole thing on that. Special, right. No, that's good. Special criteria for piers, wharves, breakwaters, municipal boat ramps, municipal piers, consolidated piers, causeways, marinas, bridges over 20 feet in length and other uses projecting into water bodies requiring site plan approval under the terms of this ordinance. In addition to the above approval criteria, the site must be demonstrated to be suitable for the proposed use according to the following special criteria. So A, we should probably just make a motion on both of these separately? or-
Yes.
Okay, so A, the project must not cause undue erosion on or near the site. Is it going to, do we make a motion that the project is not going to cause undue erosion on or near the
With a
site?
caveat based on the approval of the Army Corps of Engineers and the
And the DEP
Erosion control plans.
and the erosion control plans and
based
supervision
on the
by the town.
approval that.
These motions,
I'd also like to thank Will for all the hard work. Thank you. You put in a lot of requests and you guys really came through. So
Yeah, you did.
Thank you both
for the
for stepping up
drawings.
to the plate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, everybody who came and listened. Everybody watching at home.
Everybody that suffered through that.
Thank you very much. No, thank you.
Will they have a great day?
Not, other, under other.
Other.
We're almost adjourned.
I think there is
I
another.
know, it's, that smells good, yeah.
Oh, that's meeting on November 7th.
Is that our next meeting?
It's on that subdivision on Colcord Ave.
Yeah,
They should be back for final on that one.
all right. Okay, thanks.
Haven't seen anything yet, but that is the day he says
Yeah, it's supposed
they'll
to
be get here.
Next week, but there's nothing on the agenda for this week.
All right, thank you. Are we,
Thank you, Rosie.
thank you very much.
That is
Are
the
we
first
off?
week, right? Yeah, he's got to, yeah, he does.
He knows that.
Did you make a motion to adjourn?
No, do I need to make a motion to adjourn?
You
Did
did.
I? Okay, so we're all set to go then. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
All right.
Well.